Daylight savings time has been rough on some of you, and it shows. Some of you look rather grumpy because you didn't get that extra hour of sleep. So don't be mad at me. I didn't have anything to do with it. In fact, nobody else here has anything to do with it, right? We have a love-hate relationship with daylight savings time, right? Because those same people that curse daylight savings time and the people that created it are also the same people that when it gets to be 7 and 7:30 tonight, they're like, oh, I just love daylight savings time. The sun is staying up so much longer, and daylight savings time had nothing to do with that. Just so you know. Daylight savings time for me, when our kids were toddlers, I hated it in the fall. Because the toddlers, they don't care if the clock moves forward or backwards. They're getting up at the same time anyways. And so it's like everyone's cheering like, oh, I get an extra hour of sleep in the fall. And I'm like, not me. And I despised those people, loathed really those people that celebrated in the fall. I didn't like them. In the spring, it's fun in the spring, although it doesn't happen as often anymore because of technology. You know, people use their cell phones for alarm clocks and everything. But I always like to watch the people that come in that are the regulars for Bible class, you know, and they come in and they're like, oh, it's worship time now. Right? Or they come in at the end of worship and they're determined to get to their seat, and then they walk in with that confused look like, why is everyone here so early? And then it hits them like, oh, daylight savings time. And for those of us that don't like daylight savings time, we despise those people, don't we? Because they got an extra hour of sleep. Even though it was a mistake, they still got an extra hour of sleep. And then those people that we're looking around and we know they're not here, and it's just because they realized when they got up, oh, daylight savings time, I'm not going to church. I'll get it Sunday night. We despise them too because they got an extra hour of sleep. And now that I've got that out in the clear, I've got that off my chest, I expect most of you to come forward this morning after the sermon seeking forgiveness and prayers of the congregation for your spitefulness that you have in your hearts for those people that got an extra hour of sleep this morning. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5. If you'll go ahead and open up to Mark chapter 5. In Mark chapter 5, Jesus interacts with 3 different people specifically. And in each case, what we'll see is that those individuals will approach Jesus in a certain way. And then we'll also talk about those individuals, because when we understand their situation, it helps us understand what's taking place in Mark chapter 5. And then we'll also see and talk about how Jesus interacts with those people. And then at the end of all of that, when we're finished, I hope to make 3 points of application, and then the lesson will be yours. If I have time, maybe I'll give you a 4th point, and that'll be a freebie. But 3 points of application, all right? So in Mark chapter 5, what we have happening in the very beginning is that Jesus and his apostles have come across the Sea of Galilee to the country of the Gerasenes. And in verse 2, when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Now, if we were just to leave it at that, it'd be like, okay, there's a guy that's kind of creepy, it's kind of weird. But it's not just that. There's a lot more to this man that approaches Jesus and what he is dealing with in his life at that time. And also here in this verse, it says a man with an unclean spirit. But then when you get down to verse 9, and Jesus asked him, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. And so is it one unclean spirit, or is it many? If you consider a Roman legion, a military unit, that numbered about 7,000 people, 7,000 men. So was it 7,000 demons that this man was possessed by? Or when they finally come out of that man, they ask Jesus, they say, don't send us into the abyss, like the account in Luke chapter 8 says, but instead, look, there's a herd of pigs. And here in Mark, it says that herd of pigs numbered about 2,000. So was it 2,000 demons? You know what? We can talk about that, and that's fun to debate and pontificate and go back and forth on that. The text doesn't tell us how many demons this man is possessed by. Is it one or more than that? How many, we don't know. But we know that this is a man that has an unclean spirit or spirits. He lived among the tombs, verse 3, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles to pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. When you start to see this man and see a portrait being painted of him, if you will, you really begin to understand that this is one really creepy guy. And if you saw him coming towards you, you would be looking for a way to get away. You would be looking for that exit. That other aisle in the grocery store, maybe I'll go down this aisle and I won't see him. He elicits a type of fear within you because you don't know if he's going to attack you or anything like that and bring harm against you. It seems like the people in the communities in that area were concerned about that. They tried to subdue him only to realize that the chains and the shackles that they used, he just broke them apart. And so at the very least, they at least got him to live on the outside of town so that we know where he's at, but everywhere else in here in our community, we're safe because we know that that man is outside of town and he's living in the cemetery. When he approaches Jesus, he's probably naked and filthy. We can make that conclusion when you look at verse 15. After Jesus has talked to Legion, this demon-possessed man, it says that they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind. So when he first approaches Jesus, he's probably naked or has very little on, filthy, grimy, dirty, scary. And also he's insane and he's deranged. He's a man that wanders the hillsides yelling out and screaming out constantly. This is not a guy you're going to invite to dinner. And yet notice how he approaches Jesus. In verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. He ran and fell down before Jesus. The other two people we're going to talk about here in chapter 5 do the same thing, but in each instance, that phrase and that word is constructed just slightly different. It would be similar to this. I'll illustrate it this way. If I were to say, I ran, then you would know that sometime in the past, I went and run. I went and ran. Maybe I should work on my own English, right? But you would know that sometime in the past, I ran. I ran from what? You don't know. I didn't tell you. Why did I run? You don't know. I didn't tell you. But you know that sometime in the past I ran. But if I were to say I run, then you know I might be a person that runs on a consistent basis for exercise or for whatever reason. I run. You just know that that's something I do. Or I am going to run. Sometime in the future, I'm going to run. Why am I going to run? You don't know, neither do I, but I'm going to go run. And so you can see that the root word there, run, has to do with running, but depending on how that is constructed or the context is going to tell you exactly what that is. In the same way here, when the man comes and he falls down at Jesus' feet, it means something. And here, when it says that, this man is coming quite literally and falling down before Jesus out of reverence and respect for who Jesus is, giving him worship. And what's interesting about this is that there's two different entities that we have to deal with here, right? One, it's the man. Maybe within him, even though we know that he's insane and deranged, there's some piece of clarity that he has, and he realizes that he is in a mess. And he needs help. And he sees Jesus and he knows who Jesus is. And he knows that Jesus is the one that can help him. And so he runs and falls down before Jesus because he recognizes Jesus' authority. So he gives him that respect and that reverence and that worship that is due him. But he's also demon-possessed, right? The demons are there with him. And they have fallen down before Jesus as well. And they recognize who Jesus is because the man cries out in a loud voice in verse 7, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? of the Most High God. I adjure you by God, do not torment me. You see, even the demons recognize who Jesus is, and they recognize His authority. And they even bow down before Jesus out of respect and reverence for Him. And really what this shows, it shows that Jesus also has authority over the spiritual realm. Because when He's asking him, or those demons, what is your name? And they say, we are legion, we are many, and they come out of that man. And in Luke chapter 8, they're saying, please don't send us into the abyss. Jesus has the authority to send those demons into the abyss. And they're asking Him, please, look, there's a herd of pigs right there. And they're begging Him, send us into those pigs. And what does Jesus do? He grants them that request. He didn't have to, but because of the authority that He has, He grants them their request. And that's what they do. And so this man runs and falls at the feet of Jesus, showing Him reverence and respect and giving Him the worship that is due Him. And then we go on in verse 21. They leave the country of the Gerasenes and they go back across to the other side of the sea. And a great crowd gathered about Him, and He was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue. This could be a lesson in comparing and contrasting. So a ruler of the synagogue is going to be somebody that is well respected in the community. And the way it worked with the synagogues in each of the communities, usually there was at least one, but most often a group of men that were considered the elders of the synagogue. And they were responsible for the synagogue and coming together and those times of worship and everything. And if there's a group of men, then usually there was one that was designated. And he was responsible to be the one that would put together the order of worship. Who was going to read the scripture? Who was going to lead the prayers? He was also tasked with and given the responsibility of procuring those scrolls that had the holy scriptures on them. The Torah and the Psalms and the prophets. And he was the one that got those scrolls so that they could read those scriptures during their times of worship. And so this is a person that's well respected, probably well liked and loved. Somebody that you could come to and ask advice. And yet here we have the synagogue ruler. We learn his name, Jairus by name. And seeing Jesus, he what? He fell at His feet. He fell at His feet. The demon-possessed man did the same thing. But here, there's a difference. He fell at His feet and implored Jesus, earnestly saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. The phrase there, she is at the point of death, quite literally means she is on death's doorstep. His little girl, in verse 42, it tells us that she's 12 years old. His little girl, that 12-year-old daughter of his, is on death's doorstep. We don't know. She could be in the last days of her life. She could be in the last hours of her life, maybe even in the last hour of her life. And here's Dad coming and running and falling down at the feet of Jesus because he is desperate. He is desperate to save his little girl, to do whatever it takes. And so he's falling down at the feet of Jesus in desperation. Sure, he probably respects Jesus and gives Him reverence and knows who Jesus is, but at this point, in this moment, he is desperate because he wants to save his little girl. And so, in verse 24, Jesus went with him. And so they're on their way to the synagogue ruler's house, to Jairus' house. And on the way, there's all this group of people. There's a crowd of people crowding around Jesus and bumping into Him and everything. And He's on the way going, and there's this woman in the crowd. And verse 25, it says, this woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. A bleeding issue. The text doesn't tell us what that bleeding issue is, but we know that she's had it for 12 years. And she's gone from physician to physician, doctor to doctor, looking for something that would relieve her of this issue that has made her incredibly sick. And here in the text it tells us that not only has she had no relief or comfort from that disease, she has gotten worse. And she has spent everything that she has. And so now she's living in poverty. Maybe relying on family or friends or begging in the street to make ends meet. But she's living in poverty because she has nothing left to support herself because of this bleeding issue. And in verse 28, she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. She knew and she believed that if she just reached out and touched his garment, she would be made well. I find that interesting. It's almost like it's a precursor to the end of Mark chapter 6, when Jesus is in the region of Gennesaret and he's healing the sick. In verse 56 it says, "Wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many touched it were made well." This woman knew who Jesus was, had heard about him, wants to be healed, touches his garment, and Jesus perceives, verse 30, in himself that power had gone out from him immediately. And he turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And even his disciples are like, "Jesus, look around you. You have all these people like bumping into you and everything, and yet you're asking, who touched me?" But he doesn't move. He keeps looking around, wondering, who was it that touched me? And he continues to scan the crowd. And in verse 32, he's continuing to look around. But verse 33, "But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth." Does she revere and respect Jesus and give him worship? Most likely. Is she desperate? Yeah, she's been dealing with this for 12 years, but that's not the implication here when she comes and falls down at his feet. Instead, she falls down at his feet in fear and trembling. I think we can look at this two ways. The first way is, here's a person that is unclean. Because of this bleeding issue that she has, she's unclean, and if she's in this crowd of people, she is in a place that she should not be. And so if she's in this place that she should not be and she's touching other people, one, she's unclean, but now she is making other people unclean. Or if they touch her, then they become unclean according to Levitical law. And so now these people have to go to the priest and do those things and go through those steps in order to become clean again. And yet she's there and she knows that Jesus is looking around and she's thinking, I've been caught red-handed and now I've got to face the consequences, whatever they may be. And so she comes and falls down at Jesus' feet and tells him the truth. I think another way that we could look at this is when you look at the end of Mark chapter 4, that's where Jesus and his disciples are going across the Sea of Galilee before they get to the demon-possessed man. And there they come upon this huge windstorm, and the waves are crashing over the boat. And even the disciples are at that point when, in verse 38 of chapter 4, he was in the stern asleep, Jesus was. He was asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Even the disciples know and understand, like, okay, we've gotten to the point where it's the end. We're going to die. And here's Jesus. He's asleep. Does he not even care that he's going to die too? We're all going to die in this windstorm and with all these waves crashing over us. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with what? What does the text say? They were filled with fear. They were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" When I think of that word fear here, and also with the woman with the bleeding issue comes and she falls at Jesus' feet in fear, it's not that they're terrified or scared of what Jesus is going to do, but it's in awe and in reverence of who Jesus is, because they recognize here's somebody that is doing great and mighty things, and we don't know where it's coming from. And for this woman who had gone to physician after physician, I can say that word, I promise, and going to doctor after doctor. And you know what it's like when you go to the doctor when you're sick and they say, "Hey, take this, and in a few days you're going to be well. You'll start to feel better in a few days," right? That's what the doctors say. And so maybe she thought, well, if I just touch him and then in a few days I'm going to be made well. But no, what does the text tell us that happens? Immediately she's healed and she feels it. And so she recognizes who Jesus is and falls down before him in awe, in fear, and in trembling. Verse 35, while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" At this moment, Jairus, I'm sure, all hope had left. I wonder if he just collapsed right there on the ground in despair and began to weep, maybe even wail, because his little girl was dead. I wonder if he thought, you know what, if Jesus wouldn't have stopped because of that woman that touched him, he could have laid his hands on my little girl and saved her. Maybe he was angry at Jesus. Maybe if I would have just gone to Jesus sooner, then we would have been to my house and my little girl would have been saved. I'm sure that in that moment, Jairus is thinking there's no more hope. But overhearing verse 36, what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Do not fear, only believe. And so Jesus takes Peter and James and John. They go to the synagogue ruler's house, Jairus' house. Jesus sees a commotion and people are weeping and wailing. And when he entered the house, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And what do? They laugh at him. They laughed at him. And he puts them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in to where the child was. And taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. Jesus has come and saved Jairus' daughter, brought her back from death. In the demon-possessed man, we see that Jesus has authority over the spiritual realm. With the woman with the bleeding issue, we see that Jesus has authority over our physical side of nature, right? He has that ability to bring about healing. And he also has authority over death. When we look at Jairus' daughter, who he says, no, she's not dead, she's just asleep, and tells her to get up and walk, and she does. We begin to see who Jesus is and what he's all about. And so the first point of application I want to make here when we look at these three individuals, and when it comes to who we are as children of God and trying to become more like Jesus, what we see is that our walk of life does not matter. Where we come from does not matter. And here in this chapter, we see opposites here, opposite extremes almost, with the demon-possessed man and with Jairus, the synagogue ruler, who's well respected in the community. And then when you read through the Gospels, you see all these people that come to Jesus from all different walks of life, and yet all of them come to Jesus. And how does Jesus treat them? With compassion, with gentleness, with mercy. And you can continue to use all different kinds of words there. But the thing is that Jesus does that consistently with everybody that comes to Him, regardless of the walk of life. The second point of application that I want to make here is that it doesn't matter what your circumstances may be. It doesn't matter the situation that you're in. It doesn't matter the challenges that you're facing. You can still come to Jesus. And what is He going to do? How is He going to treat you? How does He treat people throughout the Gospels? It's the same, with the same consistency, with compassion, with gentleness, and with mercy. That doesn't change. So our walk of life doesn't matter. Our circumstances, our situation doesn't matter. We can come to Jesus with whatever it is that we have. Whatever challenges, whatever struggles. Poor or rich. Living in poverty or not. Whatever, you can just start filling in the blanks and Jesus will respond to you the same way time after time. The third point here that I want to make is, what does He have to tell Jairus? And sometimes we need that reminder as well. He tells Jairus, do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. Sometimes we get into situations and depending on where our relationship with Jesus is, it's real easy to just step back and say, you know what, I don't know how this is going to happen or what's going to take place, but I know Jesus is going to take care of it. It may not be the way that I would want it done, but I know He's going to take care of it. And it's easy for us when we're in that close relationship with Jesus to step back and say that and believe, right? But there's other times when we need to be reminded. Like, I can't take this to Jesus. He's not going to listen to me. Or if He only knew what I've done, and you can fill in the blanks there. But sometimes we have to be reminded either by Jesus or by our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ when they're elbowing us and saying, listen, you have to believe. Because this is Jesus who has authority. When you consider the storm over the Sea of Galilee, He has authority over nature. He has authority over the spiritual realm. He has authority over our physical nature. He has authority over death. So, hey, don't forget that. Believe. And that's what He has to tell Jairus. Do not fear. Only believe. Because Jesus doesn't care about your walk of life. He doesn't care about your situation or your circumstances. He wants you to believe. And He will treat you with compassion, with gentleness, and with mercy. When we first moved to Mississippi, I'll share this story and then the lesson will be yours. When we first moved to Mississippi, I was the youth minister there at the church that we were at. And what we did every summer with all the churches in the Memphis area, the Mid-South area, all these churches would come to Memphis. And we would do a work camp. And within that, what that entailed was that we would come together and we'd be divided up into different teams and everything. And we would go throughout inner city Memphis and paint people's homes. And usually those people, the homes that we painted were people that didn't have the means to pay for the paint or pay for somebody to come and paint their home, or they didn't have the physical ability to do that for whatever reason. They couldn't paint their own house. And a lot of these homes, they just needed a fresh coat of paint before any other deterioration took place. And in the end, they had more repairs that they were going to need to make because the paint on their homes was failing. So we painted these houses. And the first time I went and did this, I was put in charge of a group. And so I had my co-leaders, and we had about 12 or 15 teens, and we went to this house. And what we were supposed to do is meet with the homeowner either on their porch or in their front yard and introduce ourselves, get to know them, pray with them, and then get to work. Because we had a lot of scraping to do, and it was all done by hand. We didn't have any of the fancy tools that painters have. It was all done by hand. Maybe it was exercise in patience. That's probably a good way to, character building for the teens especially. But this particular homeowner, we were at his house because the year before he had had a stroke and he was still recovering from that stroke. And so we were standing there and he was real close to me and we introduced ourselves and I asked him, I said, is there anything that we can pray for or anything that we can do for you this week? And so we were literally almost standing face to face when he started to speak, and he was hard to understand. The other part of it was he had just finished breakfast. And so when he started to speak, even if he hadn't eaten, spittle and food particles came out of his mouth. He couldn't help it. He's standing there and he's sharing this with me, and I continue to look him in the eye as that spittle and food gets on me. And I could see the teens and the adults around me go like, ooh, and kind of step back a little bit. You know what I did the week before? I'm telling you, if you do this, just be prepared. I asked God to teach me and to show me how to look at people the way He does. And if you're going to pray that, you better buckle up because the lesson's going to start. And in that moment, I realized that God was teaching me a lesson to look at people the way that He does, to look at people the way His Son does. And so I stood there with this homeowner looking him in the eye, knowing that my response is going to impact the teens that are there ready to paint his house. And so when the homeowner was done speaking, we grabbed hands. I thanked him. We grabbed hands and we prayed. We prayed for him. And then he went inside. And all I did was just wipe everything off and say, okay, guys, we got to get to work because he needs help. You want to talk about making an impact in people's lives and showing people what it means to look at others the way Jesus would and to show compassion and gentleness and mercy? I promise you, if you pray that prayer, the lesson will start. And it may be uncomfortable. Throughout that whole week, that gentleman sat on his porch. He never sat alone. One or two or three of our teens or one of the other adults were sitting there with him, talking to him, conversing with him. At one point, he came out in the middle of the day, and I was trying to direct teens, and he needed something, and I'm like, I'm trying to get your house painted. And he calls me into his home, and he was having trouble because he was trying to watch a show on TV, but his cable was messing up. And so he had the cable company on the phone line. They couldn't understand him, and so he just hands me the phone. And so I'm talking to the cable company, trying to help him troubleshoot what was going on. We didn't just make a friend that week. We made a brother. You see, Jesus doesn't care about your walk of life. He doesn't care about your circumstances or your situation or your challenges. He cares about those things. But what I mean in that is that you can go to Jesus regardless of what it is. He's not worried about that or concerned about that. He just wants you to believe in Him so that He can speak truth into your life and take care of the things that you're struggling with. I get to meet with a group of guys. We meet every 2 weeks, and we get together and we go through a Bible study. And Jeff Zerfus is in that group. We're talking about this, and he said something that I wrote down, and I use it all the time, is that life is chaotic. There's just chaos. Regardless of how good things are going for you or I, there's just chaos. But when you have Jesus, there's peace amongst the chaos, isn't there? That's what Jeff said. When you have Jesus, there's peace in the chaos. That chaos is always going to be there. There's peace in the chaos, but maybe we have that peace, and the other aspect of it is that we have to show others that as well. And we show others that by looking at them the same way that Jesus would look at you or I. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what situations you're challenged with or faced with. But I know somebody who can help take care of those things. And maybe you do believe and you want to put on Christ in baptism, then we can do that as well. Whatever it may be for you, would you come as we stand and sing?